My name is Claire Delaney, and if anyone ever tells you that blood makes you family, they've never been raised in a house where your bruises were blamed on your own attitude. I'm 22 now. I own a motorcycle garage in East Knoxville. People drive miles to have their bikes repaired here. They call me Delaney the Machine Whisperer now. Funny, isn't it? How the same girl they once called a burden now owns the shop their husbands and sons swear by. But this isn't about grease or gears. This is about the night I stood on a freezing curb with nothing but a shredded backpack, a torn jacket, and blood drying under my nose. And I realized the woman who was supposed to protect me would rather see me die in the street than admit I'd done something good. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this really began. I was 4 the first time I saw Linda Branson. I remember her cherry red nails tapping impatiently against the doorframe as I stepped out of the social worker's car. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Carl, her husband, didn't bother to fake anything. He grabbed my arm like he was picking up trash. They were my foster parents. At least, that's what the paperwork said. But the truth? I was nothing more than a monthly welfare check and a tax write-off. They lived in a worn-down house on the edge of town. Broken siding, a busted porch light, a front yard full of weeds and cigarette butts. But what made it feel like prison wasn't the roaches or the mold. It was the silence. The silence you learn to survive in, the kind where no one asks questions because everyone's afraid of the answers. Carl hit. Linda didn't. She preferred her words. "You're trash," she'd hiss in my ear while scrubbing lipstick off the coffee table. "You should be grateful we even let you breathe our air." They weren't the only ones in that house. Danny and Marissa came later. Danny barely spoke. Marissa, younger than me, had eyes too old for her face. The 3 of us weren't related by blood, but trauma makes stronger ties than DNA ever could. I started working at 14, dishes in the back of a greasy diner. My hands cracked from hot water, my shoes soaked in leftover mop water. At 15, I picked up shifts at a tire shop. I didn't go to dances or sleepovers. I didn't know what prom was until someone mentioned it in passing. "Every cent I made," Carl demanded. "You live here, you pay rent," he'd grunt, beer bottle in hand. But I found ways to hide a few dollars. Danny needed a jacket. Marissa's shoes were torn. I saved what I could, stashed beneath a loose floorboard in the kitchen, or slipped into the lining of my hoodie. I wasn't trying to escape. I was just trying to protect the only people I cared about. And then I did something stupid. I bought Marissa a sketchbook. A cheap one, just a few bucks. But I'd seen the way she stared at the art supplies in the corner store window. I wanted, just once, for her to have something that was hers. When I gave it to her, she cried. Not loud, just this quiet, trembling sound, like she didn't know how to receive kindness. And I felt powerful. For once, like I'd done something right. That lasted less than a day. Carl found it the next morning. He didn't ask where I got it, didn't even yell, just grabbed the sketchbook, ripped out every page, and threw it into the fireplace. Then came the belt. He beat me until my ribs ached when I breathed. And Linda? She watched, sipped her coffee like it was a Saturday morning talk show. "You want to play the hero?" she said, her voice flat. "Then get used to bleeding for nothing." That was the night something in me split. I still stayed, I still worked, I still handed over my money, but inside me a fire lit, the kind that doesn't go out, not even in the darkest places. I didn't know what I was waiting for, just something, a sign, a chance. And then he came, a stranger in a leather jacket, riding a beast of a motorcycle. His name was Ray. I didn't know it yet, but that man was about to change everything. His daughter was sick, burning up in the back seat of a van that broke down outside my tire shop. The other guys backed away. Even my boss told me to ignore him. "You help that guy, we're all dead," he warned. But I couldn't look away. That little girl, she reminded me of Marissa. So I did it. I fixed the van, got them back on the road, and got fired the same hour. No warning, no apology, just a cold voice. "Pack your things. You're done here." I walked out of that shop with grease still on my hands, my lungs still full of exhaust fumes, and no clue how I'd feed the people I was fighting for. When I told Linda, she laughed. "You think you're some kind of hero?" she spat, hurling a glass at my head. "You just threw away the only thing you had." Carl beat me until I couldn't stand. Then they opened the front door and dragged me outside. "You're not welcome here anymore," Linda said, slamming the door behind me. I stood there, in the cold, the porch light flickering above me like it couldn't decide if I was real. No coat, no shoes, just a body full of bruises and a heart full of rage. I walked that night, nowhere in mind, just away. I ended up curled behind a dumpster behind the diner, shivering, swallowing my tears so no one would hear. That's where Eddie, the diner owner, found me the next morning. He didn't say much, just handed me a blanket and said, "Stay quiet and don't break anything." That was the first act of kindness I'd been shown in years. I slept on the floor of the diner for weeks, ate leftover fries and worked my fingers raw. But even then, even at rock bottom, I didn't give up. Because Marissa and Danny were still in that house, and one way or another, I was going to get them out. But I never imagined that the very man I helped, that biker no one dared to cross, would be the one to give me my shot at revenge. Not with fists, not with fire, with power, with leverage, and with justice sweeter than blood. Have you ever been cast out for doing the right thing? Been told you're nothing, only to dream of the day you'd prove them wrong? Then you already know this fire, and you'll want to hear what happens next. Like, comment, and share if you've ever stood at rock bottom and still dared to look up. The floor of Eddie's diner was cold, not just because the heating barely worked in the back kitchen, but because loneliness, like frost, seeps in through your bones when nobody's watching. That little corner behind the pantry, wedged between stacks of tomato cans and grease-stained mop buckets, became my bedroom, my hiding place, my starting line. Eddie never asked questions. He just nodded when I offered to scrub, wipe, and wash every dish from dusk till dawn in exchange for food scraps and a thin blanket. His voice was gravel wrapped in nicotine. "Stay out of sight," he grumbled. "Cops walk by sometimes. I ain't answering for you." I nodded, too ashamed to say thank you, too afraid to breathe too loud. But in that little grimy corner, I did something no one in my life had allowed me to do. I dreamed. Not big dreams, not back then. Just scraps of hope, visions of a warm house with a door I didn't have to fear, with shelves filled with Marissa's drawings and Danny's books. A place where no one raised their voice unless they were laughing. I didn't know how to get there, but I knew one thing: I couldn't give up. During the day, I borrowed Eddie's rusted bike and rode through East Knoxville, knocking on every garage, every shop, every sketchy warehouse with a help wanted sign scribbled in faded Sharpie. Most looked me up and down, frowned at my bruised face and greasy hoodie, and shook their heads. "You homeless? Got no ID? Come back next month, kid." So I kept riding. Some days I didn't find work. Some days I didn't eat. But at night I returned to the diner and wrote letters. Dozens of them. To Marissa, to Danny. I didn't know how to send them. Didn't even know if they'd ever be read. But I had to write them to stay sane. I scribbled them on napkins, receipt rolls, the back of discarded food invoices. Tucked them into a tattered shoebox Eddie let me keep by my blanket. "Danny, I hope you're still reading by flashlight under the sheets. One day I'll bring you real books, hardcovers, Ones that don't smell like mold. Marissa, I still see your sketchbook in the fire. I can't forget it. But one day, you'll draw again. I swear to you. Each word, each ink blot, became a piece of my soul trying to reach them. I was too weak to go back, but I was strong enough to keep trying. And then one night, as I was scraping gum off the bottom of a booth and humming some half-remembered tune, Eddie tossed a folded newspaper on the counter. Garage on Franklin looking for hands. Ain't great pay, but it's something. I stared at the ad like it was the Holy Grail. A job. A real one. I'll go first thing in the morning, I whispered, heart racing. Eddie just shrugged, lighting another cigarette. Don't screw it up, kid. That night, I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling tiles, watching the flickering light bulb dance shadows on the walls, and imagined what it would feel like to buy Marissa her own pencils again, this time with nobody watching, nobody stealing them away. When the sun rose, I washed up in the diner sink, borrowed one of Eddie's old flannel shirts, and pedaled toward Franklin Street like my life depended on it. Because it did. And I didn't know it yet. But the man who opened that garage door was about to become the second person who ever believed in me. His name was Mac. Gray beard, oil-stained overalls, eyes like flint. "What's your experience?" he asked, arms crossed, not even bothering to say hello. I swallowed hard. Tires, oil changes, brake pads. I've cleaned engines. I'm not certified, but I learned fast. He didn't respond, just turned, walked back inside, and muttered, "Grab a wrench. Let's see what you're made of." That was it. No contract, no handshake, just a dirty wrench, a rusted pickup truck, and my hands trembling as I opened the hood. But I didn't care, because I was in. For the first time since I was thrown out, I had a foot in the door, and for the first time, a sliver of a plan. I stayed at Mac's garage like a stray dog someone forgot to chase away. He didn't ask where I was living. He didn't comment on the bruises that hadn't fully faded. And I didn't volunteer anything. We had a silent contract, forged in oil-stained silence and busted knuckles. He threw work my way, and I caught it like it was oxygen. For the first few weeks, I did the jobs nobody else wanted, scraping gunk from undercarriages, hauling bald tires out to the dumpsters, cleaning the bathroom after a plumber would have walked out. My hands were always dirty, my back always sore, but something inside me started to settle, like I'd finally stepped into a life that didn't revolve around surviving punches or dodging empty bottles. Every night after my shift, I pedaled back to the diner. Eddie would be behind the counter, grumbling about the grill or yelling at a supplier over the phone. He never smiled. But some nights, he left an extra biscuit on a plate by the sink. Never said it was for me. Didn't need to. I'd eat it slow. Cherish the crumbs like gold. Then I'd curl up on my thin blanket with a wrench still in my back pocket and write more letters. "Marissa, I fixed a busted Chevy today. The radiator hissed like it was breathing. You'd have laughed at how dirty I got. I thought of you when I wiped the fog off the window. It looked like one of your old drawings. Danny, I asked the boss if he knew anyone who sold used books. He said he'd think about it. Maybe, just maybe, you'll get that pirate story one day." I still didn't know how to reach them. I just knew I had to keep going. I had to believe the road I was paving in sweat and grease would one day lead me back to them. Then one Friday, everything changed. It was just past 7 p.m. I was elbow deep in the engine bay of a battered Corolla when Mac walked over, wiping his hands with a red rag. "You ever fix a starter by yourself?" I hesitated. "I've watched it done. Never done it alone." He didn't blink. "Good. You're doing one tomorrow. We've got a backlog. Can't baby you anymore." I stared at him. "You're letting me work solo?" He shrugged. "You want a real paycheck, you earn it." A real paycheck, not tips, not under-the-table change, not soggy fries at closing. A paycheck. That night, I barely made it back to the diner before collapsing onto the floor, shaking with exhaustion and pride. I tucked a crumpled dollar under my blanket. My first real tip. Not much, but it felt like a seed planted in concrete. The next day, I did the job. It wasn't perfect. I struggled. My hands bled. I had to restart twice. But by noon, the Corolla roared to life. Matt grunted. "Not bad, Delaney." He used my name. He'd never done that before. The sound of it made my throat tighten. That evening, he handed me a folded envelope. "Your first week. Light, but better than nothing." Inside were 3 $20 bills. $60. 60 whole dollars that belonged to me. I stared at the cash like it was made of diamonds. In my old life, Carl would have snatched it from my hand and bought beer before I could blink. But now, it was mine, and I knew exactly what I'd do with it. I rode Eddie's rickety bike across town to a small second-hand shop I'd passed 100 times. The kind of place with crooked shelves and a little bell above the door that jingled like laughter. Inside, I found a used sketchbook for $4.50, a pack of colored pencils, dull but still good, for $2, and a dog-eared paperback about pirates for $1.75. I held them close like treasures, paid in cash, declined a bag. Back at the diner, I wrapped them in brown paper I'd scrounged from the back kitchen and tied them with string from a broken mop. I wrote a note on the front. "I haven't forgotten. I'll find you again. I swear it." And at the very bottom of the page, barely legible, "I'm still your sister." It was a risk, but I had to try. I biked back toward the Bransons' house the next morning, my heart pounding with every turn of the pedal. I stayed on the opposite sidewalk, keeping to the shadows, waiting, and then a flash of familiar hair. Marissa. She was sitting on the front steps, hunched over, arms hugging her knees, smaller than I remembered, thinner. But it was her. I waited until Linda's voice shouted from inside, and Marissa stood up. Then I bolted across the street, dropped the package at the edge of the porch, and sprinted away. I didn't look back. Not because I didn't want to, because I couldn't. I spent the next 2 days half crazy with worry. Would they find the package? Would Linda destroy it? Would Marissa even know it was from me? Then, one night, as I walked into the diner after my shift, I saw it, taped to the back alley door, folded in half, a drawing, pencil on paper, a sketch of a motorcycle engine, detailed and beautiful. And next to it, a tiny stick figure girl in a hoodie holding a wrench. Below it, scrawled in Marissa's handwriting, "I still believe in you." I fell to my knees and cried. For the first time since being kicked out, I didn't feel alone. After that drawing, everything inside me changed. It wasn't just that Marissa remembered me. It wasn't just that she still believed in me. It was that I finally had proof, real, physical, trembling in my hands proof, that I wasn't just fighting shadows, that somewhere inside that hell house on Fulton Street, the kids I loved were still holding on, and that meant I couldn't falter. Not now, not ever again. From that night on, I worked like I was possessed. I showed up at Mac's garage 30 minutes early and stayed 2 hours late. I did double shifts without complaint, learned carburetors like they were scripture, memorized engine codes and part numbers in my sleep. Mac didn't praise much, but he stopped watching over my shoulder. That was enough. I started fixing things faster, cleaner, better. Customers noticed. One woman even brought me a cup of hot cocoa after I managed to revive her old Pontiac. She smiled as she handed it to me and said, "You got golden hands, girl." Golden hands. That stuck with me. because for most of my life, my hands were only good for scrubbing dishes and shielding my face from blows. Now they were doing something that mattered, but while my days were filled with work, my nights were haunted by silence. Marissa's drawing was the last message I received for nearly 3 weeks. I returned to that alley door behind the diner every night, hoping for another sketch, another word, a sign that Danny was okay. But nothing came, and that silence gnawed at me worse than hunger ever had. I began writing again, longer letters, more desperate. Danny, I need to know you're all right. Please, draw something, write me something, anything. Marissa, if they hurt you, tell me. I'll find a way to stop it. Just let me know. But I was throwing words into the void. Then one night, as the wind howled down the alley and my fingers went numb from cold, I saw a movement near the dumpster, a shadow, small, quick. I stepped forward, my breath catching. It was Danny. He was thinner than I remembered. His coat was 2 sizes too small, and his shoes were wrapped in duct tape. But it was him, his eyes still wide and soft and scared. He didn't speak, just held out a folded piece of paper and ran. I didn't chase him. I couldn't. My knees buckled as I opened the note with shaking hands. It read, "She hides your letters, but I found one. Marissa cried, I miss you. They say you're dead. I know they're lying." And at the bottom, in a jagged scrawl, he'd drawn 3 stick figures, one with a wrench, one with a book, and one holding a pencil. They were standing under a sun. I clutched the paper to my chest like it was a lifeline. Danny was alive. He remembered. They both did. But they were still trapped. And I knew what that meant. I had to get stronger, not just emotionally, not just in spirit. I needed money. I needed allies. I needed leverage. Because going up against Carl and Linda Branson wouldn't be as simple as showing up and demanding my siblings back. They'd lie, manipulate, maybe even move the kids before I could act. I needed something they couldn't ignore, something that would shake their world the way they'd shaken mine. That's when I started asking questions, quietly, subtly. Mac had a few friends who used to run security gigs, tough men with pasts more colorful than legal. I overheard them talking once about a bar across town where people like Carl tended to run their mouths too loud after too many drinks. I started hanging around that bar after shifts, not inside. I couldn't risk being seen, but near enough to hear, near enough to learn. And after a few days, I did. I heard Carl bragging about gambling away his rent money. Again. Heard him joke about stupid welfare kids. Watched him exchange small envelopes with men who didn't smile. I began to piece it together. Carl was in debt, not just behind on bills. He owed money to the wrong kind of people, the kind who don't care if you're a foster dad or a preacher or a corpse, the kind who collect in blood. At first, I felt nothing but fear. If Carl was desperate, he'd be even more dangerous, more cruel. I'd seen what he did when the power got shut off for a week. He went wild. Marissa had a black eye for days. But then, a thought crept in. If he was in trouble, maybe I could use that. Maybe, just maybe, his desperation could become my opportunity. But I couldn't do it alone. And that's when fate reminded me I'd once saved a life. It was nearly a month to the day since I'd fixed the biker's van, since I got fired for helping him. I hadn't thought much about it. I'd told myself I did the right thing, even if it cost me. But apparently, not everyone forgot. Because that night, as I was locking up the garage, a motorcycle rolled into the lot, black, loud, and powerful. And on it, the same man, Ray. He parked, pulled off his helmet, and gave me a nod like we were old war buddies. "I've been looking for you," he said. My pulse jumped. "Why?" He reached into his jacket and pulled out a photo. his daughter, smiling, healthy, eating ice cream in a hospital bed. "You saved her life," he said. "That's something I don't forget." I stared, stunned. "She's okay?" He nodded. "Yeah, because of you." He paused, then added, "I owe you. So if you ever need anything, and I mean anything, you come to me." And just like that, the universe tilted, because I did need something. I needed him, but I didn't say it right then. I just smiled, nodded, and shook his hand, the grease on mine staining his leather gloves. Because revenge isn't taken in anger, it's built in silence. And now I had a biker's gratitude, a mechanic's hands, and 2 kids who still believed in me. The fire inside me had become an inferno. I couldn't sleep that night, not because I was cold. Eddie had let me bring in an old space heater that buzzed like a dying bee, not because I was hungry. He'd given me leftover hash and a slice of burnt pie after my shift, but because my mind was racing. Ray, the biker I had helped weeks ago, had found me, sought me out, offered a blank check in the form of a promise. "If you ever need anything, and I mean anything, you come to me." People like Carl and Linda operated in darkness, behind locked doors and whispered threats. But people like Ray, they carried storms in their pockets. And I had just been handed the match, but I wasn't reckless, not anymore. Before I made a single move, I needed to make sure that whatever I did wouldn't make life worse for Danny and Marissa. The Bransons were paranoid. If they even sensed I was trying to get close again, they'd tighten the leash on my siblings until there was nothing left to save. So I waited, watched, planned. I spent my evenings circling their house like a ghost, hidden in the shadows, hood up, staying out of streetlights. I noted every pattern. When Carl left, how often Linda disappeared for errands that lasted 4 hours, when the porch light was on, when it was off, how many locks were on the door, what cars came and went. Every night, I returned to the diner, redrawing the house on scrap paper, sketching routes, measuring windows, listing everything I'd need if I had to take them out by force, legally or not. I wasn't planning a heist. I was planning a rescue. And then came the last straw. It was a Tuesday night when I spotted Marissa sneaking outside to empty the trash. She looked older, not in years, but in sorrow. Her ponytail was shorter, uneven, like someone had hacked it off in anger. She moved slower, like her limbs were wrapped in invisible weights. I almost called out to her, but then I saw it, a fresh bruise blooming purple on her cheekbone like a dark blossom, and rage erupted inside me like wildfire. I ducked behind a parked car as she turned, emptying the trash, glancing over her shoulder the way I used to, like even shadows might slap her. When she went back inside, I gritted my teeth so hard my jaw ached. That was it. No more waiting, no more letters, no more drawing hope in chalk only for the rain to wash it away. It was time to act. The next day, I closed the garage early and biked across town to the bar where I'd first heard Carl bragging about his gambling. I knew Ray would be there, or someone who could find him. And I was right. There, at the corner booth, sat a tall man in a denim vest with flames stitched across the shoulders. His hair was tied back, and he had the kind of face that looked like it had seen one too many fights. I walked straight up to him and said, "I need to talk to Ray." He didn't look up. "Who's asking?" "Claire Delaney, the girl who fixed his van." That made him pause. He pulled out a phone, muttered something, then nodded at me. "Follow me." 10 minutes later, I was standing in a dimly lit garage on the edge of the city, where a dozen bikes gleamed under flickering lights, and Ray leaned against a toolbox like he'd been waiting for me all day. "You cashing in already?" he asked, half grinning. I nodded. I need help. And then I told him everything about Carl, Linda, the bruises, the stolen money, the lies they fed social workers, the way they kept Danny and Marissa like hostages, the way I was thrown out like trash for daring to save someone else's child. Ray didn't interrupt once. He just listened, his jaw clenched, arms crossed tight. When I was finished, he said, "I can make them disappear." I blinked. "What?" He shrugged. "They touch kids. People like that don't deserve daylight. I've got guys who do it for free." "No," I said quickly, my voice shaking. "I don't want them dead. I want them powerless. I want them to watch as everything they've built rots in front of them. I want to take Danny and Marissa, legally, safely, and in a way they can't undo." Ray smirked. "You're cold." "I'm focused." He studied me for a moment, then nodded. "All right, let's do it your way, but you'll need leverage." "I already have it," I said. I pulled out my notebook, the one filled with every debt Carl owed, every shady guy I'd seen him meet, every license plate I'd scribbled down. I'd built a case, brick by brick. Ray whistled low. "Impressive. You ever think about being a bounty hunter?" I smirked. "Maybe when this is over." He leaned forward. "All right, Claire, I'll handle the pressure. I've got a few friends who can make Carl very uncomfortable. You focus on the paperwork. We're going to need custody petitions, signatures, affidavits. Social services won't listen unless you hit them with fire and fact." "And what about the Bransons?" I asked. He grinned. "Leave that to me." The next 2 weeks blurred into motion. Ray's crew started showing up at Carl's usual haunts, not threatening, just watching, making sure he knew his shadow wasn't his own anymore. Word spread fast. Carl started skipping the bar, started staying home. Paranoia does that to cowards. Meanwhile, I filed my petition with family court, armed with every piece of evidence I had. Mac helped me notarize forms. Eddie vouched for my job, my living situation. Ray... Well, let's just say the judge received an anonymous letter with a few very revealing photos of Carl's business dealings. It was all legal, barely, but legal enough. And on a rainy Thursday morning, I received a call from a social worker named Helen. "I've reviewed your petition, Ms. Delaney. We're opening an emergency investigation into Carl and Linda Branson. If the children confirm abuse, we'll move them to temporary custody." Temporary custody. It wasn't freedom yet, but it was the first crack in the wall. I rode to the courthouse that afternoon with shaking hands and knees that barely held me. As I walked into the gray stone building, soaked to the bone, I looked up at the heavy clouds and whispered, "This is for you, Marissa. For you, Danny. I'm coming." And this time, I wasn't leaving without them. They say justice is blind. But that morning, as I walked into the courthouse, soaked in rain and nerves, it felt like justice was watching me, waiting to see if I'd flinch. I didn't, because I couldn't afford to. The walls of that building were gray, like every nightmare I'd ever lived in Carl and Linda's house. Everything echoed, heels on tile, whispers from corners, the quiet thud of my heart in my ears. I walked past people shouting at lawyers, mothers cradling infants, old men shaking their heads, lives on the edge. But mine was ready to leap. The courtroom was cold, not just from the AC. It was the kind of cold that came from tension, from years of lies dragging their claws across truth. The judge sat high, her face unreadable behind square glasses. Beside me was Helen, the social worker. She had a folder an inch thick in her hands, and in that folder, everything I had bled, fought, and cried for. Across the room sat Carl, clean shave, Collared shirt, new shoes, acting. Linda was beside him, clutching a fake pearl necklace and a Bible she hadn't opened since I was a child. She was muttering under her breath like she was praying. But the only God Linda ever worshipped was control. Marissa and Danny weren't there. They weren't allowed in yet. Too emotionally vulnerable, Helen had said. But I was here. And for once, they had to answer. The judge opened the file and cleared her throat. Ms. Claire Delaney, you are petitioning for emergency custody of minors Marissa and Daniel Branson, currently in the foster care of Carl and Linda Branson. Is that correct? Yes, Your Honor, I replied, voice steady. She nodded. And you allege sustained abuse, financial exploitation, and neglect? I do. Do you have evidence? I looked at Helen. She stood, handed over the folder, and said, Your Honor, enclosed are medical reports, photographic evidence, sworn statements from former neighbors, employment records, surveillance logs, and police tip-offs. Carl flinched at the word surveillance. Linda turned pale. The judge took her time flipping through the file. The silence was thunderous. Then she spoke. I see that the petitioner was a minor herself until recently. How do you intend to provide care? That was my moment. I stood taller. I've held 2 jobs since I was 14. I've worked full-time for the last 9 months. I have a steady income, a place to stay, and character witnesses from my employer and landlord. I don't want money. I don't want revenge. I want those kids safe. Carl scoffed loudly. The judge turned to him. Mr. Branson, would you like to respond? He stood, tugging at his collar, trying to look like a misunderstood saint. Your Honor, we took her in when nobody else would. She was troubled. She ran with the wrong crowd. She disappeared for months, didn't check on the kids, didn't offer help. She's here now because she's bitter, not because she cares. Linda chimed in, voice trembling with fake sorrow. We gave her a home. Food, clothes, and this is how she repays us, by dragging us into court with lies. I clenched my jaw. I didn't speak, because Helen did. We've interviewed both minors separately. Their statements match, detailed descriptions of abuse, manipulation, emotional terror, and physical punishment. They confirm what Ms. Delaney has reported, and I have here. She held up a crumpled piece of paper, a sketch Marissa drew of a belt buckle with her blood on it. The name Carl is scratched into the leather. Linda gasped. Carl paled. The courtroom buzzed with whispers. The judge silenced them with a single look. I've seen enough, she said. Then she turned to me. You'll have temporary custody until the investigation concludes. If all goes well, we'll proceed to permanent placement. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I just stood there, shaking, as Linda screamed, She's trash! She's always been trash! You'll regret this! The bailiff stepped in, holding her back as Carl tried to argue with the judge, but his words fell into a void of irrelevance, because the gavel had already fallen, and I had won. Marissa and Danny were brought in through a side door. The second they saw me, they ran. We didn't care who was watching. We collided in the center of the courtroom, arms tight, faces buried, tears streaming silently. We weren't just hugging. We were rebuilding something that had been shattered for years. For the first time since being thrown out into the cold, I felt like I was home. After the ruling, everything moved fast. Paperwork, signatures, affidavits, emergency approvals. I barely had time to blink before Helen was handing me a set of documents with trembling fingers and murmuring, "They're yours for now. Make sure you rest. You're going to need your strength." But I couldn't rest. Not yet. Because Marissa and Danny stood in front of me, fragile and exhausted, carrying bags that looked heavier than their bodies. Marissa's eyes darted in every direction like someone might yank her back at any moment. Danny clung to her shirt sleeve as if he was still waiting to be punished for breathing. I had dreamed of this moment, but now that they were here, I realized the real fight was just beginning, because getting them out was one thing, making them believe they were safe was another. "Hey," I said gently as we stood in the courthouse lobby. "We're going home." Danny looked up at me. "Which home?" I swallowed. "Not theirs. Never again." I took them to Eddie's diner first. It was the only place I had, the only roof I could offer until I figured something else out. Eddie didn't ask questions when I brought them in, just muttered something about mouths to feed, and set 3 plates of fries on the counter. Marissa stared at hers like it was a trick. Danny picked up each fry like it was gold. I sat between them in the booth where I used to scrub gum. That night, we barely spoke, but we stayed close. Like maybe if we touched shoulders, the world couldn't steal us apart again. The next day, I borrowed a spare mattress from Mac's shop. He had an old cot he used during overnight engine rebuilds. We hauled it into the diner's storage room, cleared out the boxes of napkins and syrup bottles, and laid down blankets over the cold tile floor. It wasn't a palace. It wasn't even an apartment. But it was ours. I split my diner shifts with Eddie's blessing. "You got family now," he grunted. "Go take care of 'em." I used every dollar I had saved from the garage to buy groceries and a few second-hand clothes. I found a thrift shop that sold backpacks and school supplies for pennies. Marissa got a sketch pad. Danny got 2 paperbacks, one about pirates, one about outer space. When I gave them the books, Danny whispered, "I thought you were dead." I knelt in front of him, tears brimming. "I thought I'd lost you forever." He didn't cry. He just leaned into me and didn't let go. Marissa, meanwhile, was harder to reach. She still slept curled in a ball, flinched at loud noises, and sometimes refused to eat unless I tasted the food first. Linda had poisoned her trust in everything. One night, I found her standing in the alley behind the diner, staring at the stars. "I can't draw anymore," she whispered without turning. "Why?" "My hands shake." I stepped beside her. "Mine used to, too." She turned to me. "Did they stop?" "No," I said honestly, "but I learned to work through the shaking." Marissa was quiet for a moment. Then she held out her sketch pad. "Will you keep this safe for me?" I took it like it was made of glass. Always. That sketch pad lived beside my pillow after that, not because I was afraid she'd lose it, but because it reminded me what we'd survived to get here. Still, the world didn't stop turning just because I'd won in court. Carl and Linda weren't done. They filed appeals, tried to paint me as unstable, claimed I was manipulating the kids, even accused Ray of threatening them, which, to be fair, he might have implied once or twice. But the court wasn't buying it. Too much had come out. Too many witnesses stepped forward, neighbors, teachers, even a retired police officer who'd once responded to a noise complaint and saw Linda slap Marissa across the face. Every day brought another step toward permanence. But I didn't trust the system. I knew better. One mistake, one misstep, and they could come crawling back with legal tricks and fake tears. So I tightened everything. I got a cheap motel room when I found out a local shelter could sponsor us for a few weeks. I enrolled Marissa and Danny in a nearby public school and walked them there myself every morning. I worked double shifts at the garage and triple shifts at the diner. Sleep became a stranger. But I was fueled by something bigger than exhaustion. I was fueled by purpose. And then, in the middle of that whirlwind, I got a letter. Typed, official, from the Department of Family Services. I opened it with shaking hands. It read, "Based on the evidence, testimonies, and sustained care provided by Ms. Claire Delaney, this court grants her full and permanent guardianship of minors Marissa and Daniel Branson." I collapsed onto the motel bed, letter pressed to my chest, sobbing like a child. It was over. It was finally over. That night, I took Marissa and Danny to a real diner, not Eddie's, one with neon lights and milkshakes and red leather booths. We ordered whatever we wanted, ate until we couldn't move, laughed until people stared. Danny drew a spaceship on a napkin. Marissa scribbled a cartoon of Carl with a pig nose, and I just watched. Because for the first time in my entire life, I wasn't surviving. I was living, and they were too. It had been 3 weeks since I became their legal guardian. 3 weeks of getting up before dawn to pack lunchboxes I never had growing up. 3 weeks of wiping nightmares off Marissa's face with whispered prayers. 3 weeks of watching Danny come home clutching books and saying, "Did you know the moon has no sound?" And 3 weeks of wondering when Carl and Linda would rear their heads again. Because people like them don't go quietly. They don't know how. They can't stand to lose control. So when I got the email from Family Services inviting me to attend a community reconciliation forum where former guardians could air their concerns and seek clarity, I knew exactly who requested it, and I almost deleted it. Almost. But then I looked at Marissa, at Danny, and I remembered how small I felt the day I was thrown into the street like trash, blood in my mouth, no shoes on my feet, no name anyone respected. That was the day they made me feel like I would never be more than the bruises they gave me. Now I had a job, a home, a family that loved me back. I had everything they said I'd never be. So I hit accept. Let them come. Let them see. The event took place at a public community center. Neutral ground, cold chairs, cheap coffee, and walls painted beige like someone was trying to erase emotion from the room itself. There were only about 15 people in the space, a few social workers, a mediator, 2 other guardians resolving unrelated issues. And then there was me, standing in a simple black dress, hair pulled back, legal documents tucked neatly into a folder under my arm, and them, Carl in his stiff button-up, sweating through the collar, Linda in a navy skirt suit that clung to her like it hated her skin. They looked smaller than I remembered, not physically, emotionally, stripped of their house of secrets, their power, their illusion. Linda glanced at me with a sneer like I was gum on the bottom of her shoe. Carl, however, couldn't meet my eyes. For the first time in my life, he looked ashamed. The mediator, a tall woman with glasses and calm eyes, opened the meeting gently. This isn't a courtroom. No verdicts, no arguments, just space for expression. Ms. Delaney, Mr. and Mrs. Branson, we are here to ensure all parties are heard and that the transition has been handled with respect and clarity. Respect. That word almost made me laugh, but I bit my tongue. Linda wasted no time. "She poisoned them against us," she hissed. "They don't even answer our calls. She's manipulative, vindictive. I raised that girl like my own, and this is how she thanks me?" "You raised me like a pay stub," I said quietly, "and you beat the parts of me you couldn't control." Carl flinched. Linda turned red. "That's a lie. No one can prove anything." The mediator cut in. "Actually, the court has already verified multiple instances of abuse, confirmed by both children and medical professionals. This is not about refuting what's already been legally established." Silence. Then Carl finally spoke. "I just want to know why." His voice cracked. "Why didn't you come to us? Why'd you go behind our backs? If you wanted to help the kids, you could have asked." "Because the last time I asked," I said, "you told me I was lucky you didn't leave me in a ditch." The room fell silent again. I looked directly at them now. No fear. "You hit me, Carl. You laughed while I cried. You made me work until my fingers bled and then called me lazy." "Linda, you let him. You turned the other way while he threw chairs and broke lamps and cracked ribs." Linda opened her mouth. I held up a hand. No more gaslighting. No more pretending. You don't get to rewrite history because it's inconvenient now. I took those kids out because you were breaking them just like you broke me. And the only thing you should be asking is why I didn't do it sooner." The mediator looked down at her clipboard. She didn't have to say anything. It was already over. Linda crossed her arms, shaking. "You'll fail. You think this is a fairy tale? You'll mess up. You'll end up broke, alone, and they'll come running back to us when you do." I smiled. "Then I guess we'll see." She scoffed. "You're nothing but a girl with a wrench and a savior complex." "No," I said softly, leaning forward. "I'm the girl you tried to erase, and I'm still here." I stood, opened the folder, pulled out the final court decree, laid it on the table in front of them. Permanent guardianship, sealed, signed, irrevocable. Linda went white. Carl just stared at the table like it might swallow him whole. I gathered my things, turned to the mediator. "I believe we're done here." And then I walked out. Not rushed, not shaking. I walked like a woman with the sun at her back. And when I stepped into the parking lot, I saw Ray leaning against his bike, arms crossed, smirking. "You good?" he asked. I nodded. "Better than good." He tipped his helmet. "Told you you'd win." "Not done winning yet," I replied. And I meant it, because this wasn't just revenge, this was rebirth. And they'd have to live every day knowing they lost to the girl they threw away. In the days after the forum, I waited, not for closure, not for peace, for silence. Because silence, when it comes from the mouths of people who once screamed at you daily, is its own form of justice. And it came. No more phone calls, no more threats, no social workers circling my door asking questions Carl had planted. It was like the Bransons vanished overnight. But I knew better. People like Linda don't disappear. They seethe. It wasn't long before I heard through Eddie, who had a cousin on city council, that Carl and Linda had been quietly asked to stop volunteering at their church's community pantry. Apparently, someone anonymously shared the court files, including the testimonies and medical records. That someone may have signed the envelope CD. When I told Ray, he just winked. Accidents happen. It didn't matter if Carl called me names in private. It didn't matter if Linda twisted her side of the story into something palatable for whatever pity party she threw in her Bible study group. What mattered was this. Their reputation, the only thing they had left, was turning to dust, and they had to watch. Watch, as I took the very children they had tried to crush and built a life they could never control again. It wasn't all sunshine on our side, though. Healing doesn't happen with a gavel or a piece of paper. It happens in moments. Small, slow, painful moments. Like when Danny dropped his glass one morning and flinched so hard he knocked over the chair. Like when Marissa refused to eat the spaghetti I cooked because Linda once dumped boiling noodles on her leg for forgetting to stir the sauce. Like when I had to lock the bathroom door while showering, not because I needed privacy, but because the sound of water made Marissa freeze and she'd come banging on the door sobbing if she couldn't hear my voice through it. Some nights, I sat in the hallway between their rooms, listening to their breathing just to make sure they were okay. I stopped caring about sleep. I started studying child trauma recovery and watching free therapy videos online during my breaks at the diner. I wasn't trying to be perfect. I was trying to be present. Every bruise they had, I kissed in silence. Every nightmare they whispered to me, I carried like a sacred story. They started to change. It happened slowly, like spring thawing a bitter winter. Danny smiled more, laughed even. He made friends at school and came home with drawings of rockets and dragons. One night he said, "I don't dream of closets anymore." Marissa took longer, but one afternoon I came home from a double shift and found her in the motel room, sitting on the bed. sketching. Not dark shapes or screaming faces. She was drawing me. Me, in my garage uniform, holding a wrench and laughing. When I walked in, she looked up, startled. Then slowly, she smiled. "I missed your laugh," she said. I broke down in tears, not because I was sad, but because we'd finally reached the shore after swimming through hell. It was around then that Ray came knocking again, not with a favor, with an offer. "I've got a friend downtown who runs a place called Holloway's, used to be a busted auto body shop. He's retiring, wants to hand it off cheap, said you're the only one I should tell." I stared at him. "A shop?" He nodded. "Bigger than Mac's. Has a back lot, office, even a break room. Needs work, but nothing you can't fix." I couldn't breathe. "How cheap?" "Almost suspiciously cheap." I raised a brow. He grinned. "Let's just say I may have sweetened the deal with a few friendly favors over the years. I didn't ask. I didn't need to. All I knew was that Holloway's could be ours, so I called Mac. "Think I'm ready to open my own place," I said. There was a long silence on the other end. Then, "'Bout damn time." He gave me his blessing and half his tool collection, said he'd been waiting for the day I'd outgrow his garage. It took 2 months, endless paperwork, every dollar I'd saved, and more sweat than I thought I had left in me. But we did it. Marissa painted the sign, Danny picked out the colors, and one crisp October morning, the doors opened on Delaney Customs, our garage, our home, our legacy. And the best part? It sat 3 blocks away from the Bransons' church. So every Sunday when Carl and Linda tried to pretend they were still pillars of the community, they had to drive past a building that bore the name of the girl they said would never amount to anything. A building that buzzed with business, that echoed with laughter, that shone with the life they tried so hard to extinguish. They never stopped to look. But I know they saw it. Because silence? Silence speaks louder when it tastes like shame. It was a Tuesday afternoon when she walked in. Linda, wearing oversized sunglasses and a church cardigan like she thought they'd shield her from who she used to be. I was under the hood of a Mustang, grease up to my elbows, engine humming like a heartbeat I could feel in my ribs. At first, I didn't recognize her, but then she spoke, and I swear the air dropped 10 degrees. "Claire." That voice. That shrill, calculated voice that once whispered insults over burnt toast and hissed threats under her breath when social workers weren't looking. I didn't even flinch. I just wiped my hands on a rag and turned. "I don't do free repairs," I said flatly. She blinked, faltered, looked around like maybe she'd walked into the wrong shop. Like maybe the girl she threw away couldn't possibly be me. But there I stood, taller, stronger, grease-stained, unafraid. This was my kingdom now. Her voice cracked. I just wanted to talk." I folded my arms. "About?" She hesitated. "Marissa, Danny, I haven't seen them in—" "You mean since you lost custody?" She winced like I slapped her. "I know I made mistakes," she began. I let out a dry laugh. "Mistakes? Linda, forgetting to buy milk is a mistake. What you did was deliberate cruelty." She looked down at her shoes. "I didn't come to fight." I tilted my head. "Then why did you come?" Silence. And then, something strange. She started crying. Not crocodile tears. Not the manipulative kind she used to summon on cue. These were quiet, raw, almost human. "I don't know who I am anymore," she whispered. "They were my routine, my world. And now, it's so quiet." I stared at her for a long moment. Because that silence she spoke of, that was the same silence I used to scream into when I was locked in the laundry room for speaking out of turn. the same silence that used to sit on my chest at night, like a cinder block while I listened to Danny cry in the next room. She was feeling now what she made us live through, and she couldn't stand it. "I'm not here to fix you," I said coldly. She choked out, "Do they hate me?" I didn't answer, because the truth was crueler than silence. "They're healing," I said at last. "That's all you need to know." She nodded, as if accepting that was all she would get from me. Then softly she asked, "Can I write them? One letter? Just so they know." "No," I cut in. "You had years to write kindness. You chose silence. You don't get to rewrite your story now that the spotlight's gone." A tear slid down her cheek. She looked like a ghost, the shadow of a woman who once held power in her hands and used it to crush, not protect. And I felt nothing. No pity, no rage, just clarity. Because revenge isn't about rage, not real revenge. Real revenge is being able to face your monster without flinching and watch them crumble in the reflection of who you've become. She turned to go, stopped at the door. If they ever want to see me, they won't," I said simply. Then she left, and I went back to my Mustang, back to the life she said I'd never build, back to the shop that bore my name. I didn't tell Marissa and Danny she came, because it didn't matter. They didn't need closure. They needed the future, and that future was right here, with oil under our nails, music in the background, the smell of gasoline and gumdrops, Danny's favorite, and sketchbooks stacked beside wrenches. We were okay, because we were free. The next day, Ray came by. He'd heard. Of course he had. "Word is the Ice Queen visited the castle," he joked, pulling up a stool. "She melted on arrival," I shot back. He smirked. "You good?" I nodded. I thought seeing her would shake me, but it didn't. She's just a sad woman in expensive shoes now. He leaned back. "Funny how power turns invisible when you take back your name." I paused, then asked, "Did I do the right thing? Not letting her write them?" Ray looked at me for a long moment, then said, "You didn't slam the door. You built a wall. And sometimes that's what protection looks like." I exhaled slowly. "Yeah." "You still got that fire," he added. "But now it's heat, not destruction." I smiled, because he was right. I wasn't burning from pain anymore. I was burning from purpose. We sipped sodas from old glass bottles and watched the sun bleed gold across the garage floor. And in that moment, I realized, the best part about surviving isn't that you made it. It's that now you get to build. The first snowfall came early that year. It dusted the edges of our garage sign like powdered sugar and left little white flecks on the oil-slicked driveway. Danny rushed outside with a wrench in one hand and his hoodie half-zipped, shouting, "Snow! It's really snowing!" Marissa followed, slower, arms wrapped around her sketchpad. She hated the cold. Too many nights spent in unheated rooms. But even she smiled as flakes danced across her nose. I stood at the door and watched them, hot coffee in hand, gloves still on from realigning a suspension that morning. They were laughing, not just small giggles, but real laughter, the kind that came from the gut, uncontrollable, radiant. And that's when it hit me. Carl and Linda would never get this, not ever again. They'd never see the way Marissa drew snowflakes with perfect symmetry, or how Danny tried to catch them on his tongue. They'd never get to hear the way Marissa whispered song lyrics under her breath while she sketched, or how Danny chewed his cereal like he was on a time limit. They'd never get to know the people their cruelty tried to destroy, and that was the price they never saw coming. Because it's easy to take power. It's harder to watch the people you once controlled rise higher than you ever dreamed and know your name is never coming with them. Around the holidays, cards started coming in, not from the Bransons, never from them, but from people I hadn't expected. The guidance counselor from Marissa's new school, thanking me for being the reason she started smiling again. A letter from Danny's science teacher saying he'd never met a kid so curious, and asking if he could submit Danny's volcano model to the county fair. Even Eddie, crusty old diner king himself, gave us a card, just a folded napkin with "To the toughest damn girl I ever met" scrawled across it in grease pencil. Mac showed up on Christmas Eve with a set of insulated overalls for me and a toolkit engraved with my initials. Ray. He parked his bike outside and handed me a helmet with my name airbrushed across the side. "Figured you earned it," he said. "You got more horsepower in you than half the people I ride with." We had our first real Christmas that year. No screaming, no broken plates, no fear, just cinnamon rolls Marissa made from a recipe she found online, a crooked tree Danny decorated with mismatched tinsel, and laughter that filled every corner of the tiny apartment we'd moved into above the shop. It wasn't fancy, but it was ours. One afternoon in January, Marissa asked me something I didn't expect. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Carl and Linda were better?" I paused, the question catching me mid-oil change. "Sometimes," I said. She sat on a stool nearby, sketchpad balanced on her knees. "Do you think they ever loved us?" I looked at her, at the scars hidden beneath her sleeves, at the tension that still lived in her shoulders, and I answered honestly, "No, I think they loved what we gave them. Control, money, image. But not us, not who we were." She nodded. "I don't think I even knew what love looked like until you came back." Her voice cracked on the last word. I turned and wrapped my arms around her, smudging her sketchpad with grease. "I'll never leave again," I whispered. And I meant it. Because love isn't a word. It's presence. It's staying when things are hard, showing up when the court cases end, holding on even when healing feels too slow. Carl and Linda used to say, "We feed you, clothe you, we must love you." But love isn't transactional. Love is what you give when there's nothing to gain, and that was something they'd never understand. Later that month, I passed them in town. Carl was pumping gas, looking older, more hunched. Linda sat in the passenger seat, staring straight ahead like the windshield offended her. They didn't see me, but I saw everything. I saw the hollow eyes, the way his hand trembled as he typed in the credit card pin, the stack of unpaid parking tickets in the dashboard. They weren't just fading. They were shrinking, pulled inward by the gravity of their own bitterness. And I was growing. Our shop had 3 new clients that week. One of them offered to feature us in a local newsletter. Marissa's art teacher wanted to submit her Snowflake series to a youth gallery downtown. Danny had been chosen to present a science project to the mayor at the spring fair. We were moving, upward, forward, without apology. And the Bransons? They were standing still, trapped in the prison of their own making. Sometimes people ask me if I ever want to forgive them. My answer? I already did. Not with words. With my life. Every time I sign a new invoice, every time I fix a car, every time I read a book with Danny or frame a sketch Marissa taped to the fridge, that is forgiveness. Because the best revenge isn't watching them suffer. It's refusing to let their shadow darken a single corner of your light. Spring came slowly that year, not like a miracle, more like a tired promise the world finally kept. The frost melted, inch by inch. The trees on our block began to bud, timid at first, then bursting open like they too had been holding their breath all winter. Danny started walking to school without a jacket. Marissa asked if we could repaint her room. I finally started sleeping more than 4 hours a night. Life didn't explode into joy. It settled, like a foundation, like something real. That was the real victory, not the courtroom win, not the silence from Carl and Linda, not the name on the shop sign. It was this. Sunday morning pancakes in our tiny kitchen. Danny curled up with a library book about planets. Marissa painting constellations on her ceiling. Me, under the hood of a '96 Ford pickup, singing out loud because nobody was around to tell me to shut up. One afternoon, I took a break and wandered into Marissa's room. She was sitting on her floor, surrounded by a mess of colored pencils, brushes, and glitter that made the carpet look like a unicorn exploded. I spotted something leaning against the wall and paused. It was a painting, a large one, of me, standing in front of the garage, holding a wrench, hair tied back, jaw set like someone who had walked through fire and learned how to breathe smoke. Behind me were flames, but not fire flames. They were made of flowers, and in the corner she'd written, "She built a garden out of the ashes." I stared at it so long my throat hurt. "You like it?" she asked quietly. I turned to her, and for a moment I didn't know what to say, because that painting wasn't just art. It was testament to everything we'd lived, survived, fought through, to the little girl I used to protect, now protecting me. "I love it," I whispered. "Frame it, sign it. The world needs to see it." And we did frame it. Hung it in the front office of the shop, right behind the desk where customers sign their work orders. Matt came by and stared at it for a full minute before saying, "Damn, that's power." Ray took a photo and posted it to his club's feed. It got shared over 100 times. That's when the ripple began. Local artists asked about Marissa. A neighborhood youth program invited her to teach a weekend class. One gallery even called me saying, "We don't usually feature high schoolers, but this we need." And Marissa? She blushed, mumbled something about not being ready, and then smiled like she was finally starting to believe her own light. That same week, I got an email from Danny's school. They were putting together a science showcase for young inventors. Danny had submitted a blueprint for a solar-powered hover chair. It didn't work, obviously, but it was brilliant. His teachers were stunned. They said he showed signs of early engineering talent, that he might qualify for a scholarship down the line. I read the email 3 times before it sunk in, and then I just sat on the shop steps, wiped grease off my hands, and cried like a fool. Because this was what I'd fought for, not revenge, legacy. That night, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. No words, just a screenshot. A Facebook post from Linda, captioned, "Proud of what she's become. Our girl, even if she won't admit it." Below it, a picture of me, smiling behind the counter at the shop, framed painting in the background, taken from a distance, blurry, zoomed in, clearly snapped through a car window. I stared at it for a long time, not with fear, not even anger, just disbelief. She couldn't say it to my face, couldn't say sorry, or I was wrong, or I'm proud of you. But she wanted credit. She wanted the world to think she'd had a hand in who I became. I didn't respond, didn't comment, didn't message her, because I didn't need to. I had my truth, and the people who mattered already knew it. Let her talk to a screen. I had kids to raise, and an empire to build. It was spring fair day. Danny had been talking about it for weeks. His school selected him and 2 other students to present their junior innovations at the town center, right in the middle of the annual community festival. He wore his only button-up shirt, one we thrifted for $5 and ironed until the collar stood stiff, and slicked his hair back with enough gel to survive a hurricane. His science board was patched with duct tape on the corners, but glittered with drawings and diagrams of solar currents and flight dynamics. Marissa painted stars across the top, in metallic gold. I drove them in our second-hand pickup, the same one I'd fixed months ago, with a rusty wrench and blind faith. The truck rattled like a shopping cart over potholes, but we made it to the fairgrounds without incident. Vendors were setting up booths. Kids screamed over cotton candy. A country band warmed up in the distance, tuning guitars in the sunlight. It smelled like corn dogs and promise. As we unloaded the project from the truck bed, I spotted Ray across the street, leaning against his bike, holding a paper tray of funnel cake. "You good?" he called out. I nodded. "Always," he grinned. "See you on the other side." I turned just in time to see Danny's teacher motion us over. We set up his station beneath a tent labeled "Tomorrow's Mines, Today." Danny looked nervous. "You okay?" I asked, kneeling to fix a corner of his poster. "I'm fine," he whispered. "Just don't let them laugh if I stutter." I took his hand. "They won't laugh, but if they do, I'll bring down the whole tent." He cracked a smile. "Promise?" "Promise." Marissa rolled her eyes. "You're such a dork." "You love me," he teased. "Sometimes." I watched them bicker, soft, playful, normal, and I realized something. We were no longer healing. We were living. It was just around noon when the mayor walked in. Yes, the actual mayor, with her big blue sash and camera crew in tow. She shook Danny's hand, asked him questions about his project, and laughed at his joke about building chairs for aliens who don't like gravity. Then she turned to me. "You must be Claire Delaney," she said. I blinked. "Yes, ma'am." She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a letter. "This is for you." I stared at it. Official envelope, city seal. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was an invitation. "Claire Delaney, you are cordially invited to receive the East Knoxville Community Builder Award for your contributions to youth mentorship, local small business development, and family rehabilitation." I didn't breathe. Couldn't. The mayor smiled. "You're a quiet one. We like that." I stammered, I'm just a mechanic." "No," she said firmly, "you're a builder." Ray appeared at my side, clapping a heavy hand on my shoulder. "Told you this town was watching." The camera snapped a photo. Flash. And that's when I saw her. Across the field, by the funnel cake stand. Linda. No sunglasses this time, no fake pearls, just a plain sweater, standing behind a group of people, trying and failing to look invisible. Her eyes were locked on the stage, on me, and for once, there was no hate in them, no sneer, no blame, just something that almost looked like regret. She saw the mayor hand me that award. She saw Danny pose with his science board. She saw Marissa pull out her sketch pad to draw the crowd. She saw everything she gave up. And she couldn't stop it. She didn't come any closer, didn't call out, just stood there, alone, in a sea of people who clapped for me like I had done something worthy. I didn't wave, didn't nod, didn't do anything, because I didn't need to. My story wasn't hers anymore. It was mine. That night, we returned home to the little apartment above the shop. I hung the framed award above the register. Danny taped a newspaper clipping beside it. "Local mechanic honored for youth leadership." Marissa doodled fireworks beside the headline. I stood back and looked at it all. The wrench still resting on the counter, the sketch of me in flames and flowers, the photos from the fair, the names we used to whisper like ghosts, now nothing but distant memories. Linda might still tell people she raised me. Carl might still bark to anyone who listens that I was always troubled. Let them. They could post, pretend, spin their side of history into fiction. But they'd never own what came next, because the name on the door was mine. And the kids who called me sis? They were thriving. We never shouted our victory, never made a scene. We just lived, louder than any lie they ever told. And that was the sweetest revenge of all. If this story moved you, if you've ever rebuilt yourself from nothing, or watched someone rise from pain into power, then share it, comment, like, pass it to the next survivor, because somewhere out there, there's another Claire, and she needs to know she's not alone.